Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the She Run Strong podcast, powered by Coach Parry. Today, we have a really, really awesome episode. I'm so glad we're finally doing this because we're going to tackle one of the most misunderstood topics in running, which is fatigue. And Nikki, and you know how I feel about this word, lactic acid.
Yes.
So really looking forward to this. And we're going to have one of our coaches who coaches with us. That's Coach Parry, Ntutu Letseka. He's been a guest on the She Run Strong podcast before. He's an exercise physiologist and a coach. And so, we're going to bring him on in just a second. But Nikki, I mean, we've all heard it. And if you watch track and field on TV now, I mean, the commentators are still carrying on about, the he's filling up with lactic acid, or my legs are full of lactic acid. But we know that that's not what's actually happening now, right? And so we're going to explain, we're going to bust this myth. We're going to explain what's really behind fatigue. And we really want to show you why all of the science is important for training and racing. And I just want to make a point, because I know, Nikki, you often bring me
very sciencey.
Yeah, science. We're not expecting everyone to pick up a first year physiology textbook, and we're not here to lecture you. We'll try and keep it simple. We'll try and use analogies that you can relate to, but we really just want to make it clear to you, because I often feel that if people understand the science, they buy into the reason why we're doing certain things. And so, yes, so that's today's episode. Nikki, how are you? You must also, I know you are also excited about today's episode.
Oh, I'm excited for this. So feeling, with you guys, you sports scientists and all this will be really interesting to hear the science behind all of this. I also share your sort of
disdain or
frustration with it, because it's so, people talk about this all the time, and I want to go, no, actually what you mean to say is, and we will explain what they mean to say and through this. So I'm loving it. Right, let's get started.
Let's bring him on. So there we go. Ntutu Letseka. Ntutu, thank you again for joining us. We had you on a previous episode where we went in the ins and outs of wearable devices, and so we're grateful to have you on with your expertise. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I always enjoy these chats.
Cool. Good. And today we're going to dive into your physiology knowledge, which, I mean, for those who don't know, I mean, Ntutu and I have been friends for many, many years. And when you were still in South Africa, we would often get together on a Saturday and go and have a beer or two and just land up talking physiology nonstop. And I learned so much, even though I've done exercise physiology, I learned so much from you and Ntutu.
It goes both ways, Sean. I learned a lot from you too. So it's definitely
that's very nice of you to say. I promise. You didn't have to say that, but thank you. No, that's cool. So yes, let's dive straight in. I think the biggest question is why do we get tired when we run? I mean, like, maybe if people haven't thought about it, but there's mechanisms that's going on in the body that cause us to get tired while we run. Like, so can you give us like a layman's explanation as to why we get tired?
So I think the most basic and simplest way to look at it is like from the side of energy. So your body needs energy to run. So when you're sitting around at home and you're doing, like, we're just sitting here talking, your body can handle what it needs to do, right? It's producing energy, but you're not challenging it at all in any way. But when you go out for a run, you essentially asking a question of your body. You say, I need to do this task. I want to run a 5K, I want to run a marathon, or do whatever it is that you want to do, a training session. And the body can calculate how much energy do you need to do that activity. And then it has to produce the energy from somewhere, and then it starts to use. So you've got the different molecules, macromolecules. You've got carbohydrate, glucose, or fats, and those get broken down to produce energy. And the energy currency in the cell is something called ATP. So your body is trying to produce all this ATP, but as you exercise for longer or for harder, you start to basically use up your resources, and you end up essentially having a shortfall of what you need. And once you start dipping into these resources, so either you ask your body to do a work that requires more energy than you can provide, or you start to run out of energy, your body will start to not be able to operate effectively. The muscles won't be able to contract as they should do. The brain comes into play and starts to control things and, like, says to you, hey, slow down, do whatever. And eventually that will lead to you feeling like you're fatiguing. That's sort of the most basic thing. And energy is basically the thing that underpins everything that happens in the body from that perspective.
Yeah, that's exactly spot on. Why then? And this is a leading question because I know the answer to it. But why then can we, if we're utilizing all this energy that we have, resource of, and then we run out of it in a race and we slow down, why then are we able to almost pick up the speed in the last kilometer or sprint harder? Or you see it in the like sprint finishes. I mean, the The world champs marathon this year was a great example of that, with that sprint finish. I mean, that was insane. But why does that happen? If we're running out of energy or molecules, we can still sprint at the last kilometer. So
I think the important thing is, I mentioned the brain a little bit there, is that so your brain is the supercomputer that's running everything. It's controlling everything you do. And running is a non-essential, well, any exercise, I'm saying running, but whether you're cycling, swimming, whatever you're doing, these are non-essential functions. They're not important for you for survival. So your body actually doesn't care if you run the marathon well. You do. You want to go out and do as well as you do, but the brain doesn't care. The brain is concerned about survival and ensuring that you don't do anything stupid to harm yourself, which as humans do. If there's no control mechanism, some kind of limiter in place to stop you overexerting yourself, you'll just keep going. So something there is controlling your ability to almost push yourself, and your brain is concerned about something called homeostasis. It's maintaining everything at normal levels. And when you run hard, you overheat, you use all your energy resources, something is going to have to slow you down. And that's what the brain is doing. And this is something that we call the central governor. So the brain acts as kind of like a thing to rule them all. That basically says, listen, you're going to do something stupid. So I'm going to prevent you doing something stupid. And as you start to go deeper into a marathon, for example, it's doing calculations all the time saying, okay, how much carbohydrate do I have left? How many more contractions can I do in this, in the next few hours? And if it sees that you're overexerting yourself, it sends down signals to essentially like prevent you doing that. And that is what you perceive as fatigue. So it's kind of like it's a brain-related control system. But then when you get to the end of a race and you've got 40 meters to go, there's no danger anymore. So the brain lifts the brakes, and then you're then able to tap in and push through. And it's actually like look, fatigue is complex. There are probably a lot more signals in, but I think in the grander scheme of things, that explains enough, especially that whole idea of what happens at the end of the race, how you're able to sprint when you're just feeling like completely broken at 35 Ks, but at 42 Ks, you're able to finish fast. And it is this thing that your body is only concerned, your brain is concerned about survival and keeping you alive.
Yeah, certainly in the marathon. You see that a lot in the marathon, certainly. You'll be sort of like, as a mid-packer, I'll be sort of plodding along, and then all of a sudden in the last 400 meters, these guys sort of flying past, who really I passed a wee while back, who looked really dead and gone. And then they're suddenly revived. And so basically that's down to their brain just relaxing a little bit and telling them they can now just go a bit more. It's kind of interesting. Okay, so what about is fatigue, what's it to do with lactic acid then in that case? Because I know it's a minefield. We've explained that quite briefly in that sort of it's about your energy systems, and using up your energy systems, you fatigue, but you always have a little bit left that you can go, but your brain is a protective mechanism. But then we often say, oh, well, especially the champs, the running champs, the world champs that have just been on at the moment, we've sort of said, you hear the commentators often saying, oh, that's the lactic acid built up in their body, they can't go any faster.
400.
So, it's in the 400, always the 400.
Yeah, so it's a tricky distance, 400 though, isn't it? So how does this all relate? Fatigue, is it to do with lactic acid? What do we mean by it?
I'll go back a bit to the energy part of things. So we produce energy in the different ways to produce energy. So I said everything is governed by energy. So you ask a question of your body and say, I need to do work. Your body must now provide you energy to do the work. And there's different systems. We've got the phosphocreatine system, and then the glycolytic systems, there's glycolysis, and then what we know is the aerobic system. And those are all sort of different. The aerobic system uses fats and glucose. The glycolytic only uses glucose, and the phosphocreatine uses is phosphocreatine. So lactate comes from the glycolytic system. So that's the first part of, and glycolysis is part of aerobic metabolism. You can't have one without the other. So the glucose molecule gets broken down, and at the end of glucose, that process, you end up with lactate. And so, and the thing is, when they were doing this stuff back in the 20s and the studies, we always say a correlation does not equal causation, but you need to have a correlation to first establish to prove that something is causing this thing. But lactate just tracked so well with fatigue. You are sitting down, chilling at home, lactic levels are low. You go out for an easy run, you can run for 2 hours, 3 hours, your body can maintain lactate levels at a decent level. But as soon as you start going into like marathon pace, half marathon pace, 10K pace, lactate levels rise. And at some point you get a switch where lactate just does not stop going up. And then you hit a fatigue point. If you slow down, lactate levels drop and you can continue exercising. So there was this very, very neat correlation between lactate levels in the blood and fatigue. And the assumption was this thing must be causing this, because of course, like it's and you can reproduce this time and time again. Every time you push hard, they go up, you get tired. The problem is that there's no mechanism that can show this. Like there's nothing that lactate is doing in the body that is somehow causing fatigue. And of course, this lactic acid thing, we don't produce lactic acid. What ends up in the body is lactate, and they're related. Lactate is the base form of lactic acid. And because you get muscle acidosis, which is the thing that actually causes you to feel that burning sensation, and you've got lactic acid, people assume, oh, that's what's causing it. So you do get acidosis. That does cause that burning feeling, and you get impaired muscle contraction from intensity, but lactate is not doing any of that. And lactate is actually a really, really useful thing in the body. It's a fuel. So a lot of organs in the body use it for fuel. So the brain can use lactate, the kidney, the liver, the heart can use lactate, and other skeletal muscles can use lactate. It's also like, this is so cool that when it gets sent to the liver, it's actually reconverted back into glucose. There's something called the Cori cycle that's being used in the liver that can then take that lactate, turn it back into glucose, and feed it back into essentially the blood to maintain blood glucose levels, or to the brain, which is the biggest consumer of glucose in the body. The brain uses 20% of all glucose in the body. Like it's a really, really, really hungry organ. So lactate is really not, like that thing can't be harmful. If it's doing all of that good stuff, it can't be harmful. So things then, where does all this stuff actually come from? And it actually comes from the breakdown of ATP. And again, that makes sense. You're actually producing all of this energy molecules, and it's using up all the energy that's causing you fatigue. When you break down ATP, that's where you actually get the acidosis from. ATP breakdown releases what are called hydrogen ions, and that drops the pH in the muscles, and that creates the burning sensation. And then you also get impaired muscle contraction, and this is where the phosphocreatine system comes in. There are things called phosphates, inorganic phosphates, that are released when that molecule is broken down. Those are shown to actually enter into the muscles and interact with the calcium. Calcium is very, very important for muscle contractions. And then that essentially forms a solid compound that removes calcium from being able to be used by the muscles for that cross-fiber linking that causes the contraction. So that's kind of like where the fatigue element of it comes from. So lactate just happens to track because it is a product of the process that produces energy. But other things there, the so-called waste products, are the things that are involved in making you fatigued, and it's not lactate. So lactate is really, really an important molecule. I always say, when you think about like in movies, when you have people with a redemption arc, lactate is having an amazing redemption arc, and one day we will know that lactate was actually the hero and not the villain.
Yes, exactly. No longer the bad guy.
No, exactly.
But does it build to too much then? So if it's built and you have too much lactate, it's actually too much hydrogen plus ions? So
too much lactate. So what? And again, so when I talked about energy, that is really the critical thing, is that there's two things with energy in the body when you're using it, is that you need a certain amount of energy to do a task, and you also need it at a certain rate. So how quickly can you deliver the energy to where it needs to go? And the thing about the aerobic system is that it is very, very efficient. So, and I'm just going to throw some numbers here, but they're not that important to say, but it's just to illustrate something. So aerobic system using carbohydrate, using glucose, produces, so it's ATP. We get 28 ATPs out of it. Like, so one glucose molecule gives you 28 ATPs. If you just do glycolysis on its own, one molecule gives you 2 ATPs. So it's actually quite wasteful. But the difference is that glycolysis happens very, very quickly. If you were to have two systems where the one system only goes through glycolysis and the one system does the full path aerobically, this glycolysis alone will happen 100 times before aerobic metabolism is complete. So you can actually get 200 glucose molecules, 200 ATP, sorry, from glycolysis before one cycle of aerobic metabolism is finished. The difference is you have used 100 glucose molecules versus one. So you can produce a ton of energy very, very quickly. So what happens is when you start running, particularly when you're running very, very hard, like you're running a 5K or like a mile or a 400, because you do use a little bit of glycolysis in the 400, the rate of energy is the limiting factor, that you need so much of it so quickly. And then because the aerobic side is too slow, you're just cycling through that glycolysis to meet that energy demand. And then the lactate does build up. And usually that lactate gets cleared, it gets sent to different organs, it gets used in aerobic metabolism. But because that's the aerobic pathway is so slow, everything builds up and it's in the bank of this bottleneck. And that's when the buildup happens. And also importantly, that aerobic energy production actually uses H+. You get water at the end of it. So that H+ gets used. Those phosphates get taken up and they get used to make more ATP. But if it's limited, because it can't meet the demands quickly enough, everything builds up. So again, lactate is building up, but it's not the thing that's causing fatigue. It's building up because there's nowhere else for it to go, really.
Yeah.
Just to reiterate that, I think is important because you've mentioned it, but I really want people to understand this because people will still ask, why then the feeling, the feeling after, I mean, if you've run a 400, you know what that feeling is like. And that, I think that's why the lactic acid thing fits so nicely because it feels like that. It feels like there's this acid seeping into your legs and your legs feel like lead. So just reiterate, if you can just repeat that, why do we have that feeling? It's the acidosis, right? That's happening in the cells. And then you mentioned something around like the muscles as well with calcium, right? So it's sorry, can you just reiterate?
So it is that you are getting like this acidosis, but it's not from lactate. It's from breaking down ATP. And one of the things when you break down ATP is you do produce these hydrogen ions, which normally get used up by the aerobic system, but it's not fast enough. You're producing them quicker than it can work. And at the same time, you're also producing that phosphate from the breakdown of ATP and from using phosphate creation. And the 400 being a fast event, you're using the phosphate creation system to begin with.
Yep.
And that's where all of that inorganic phosphate comes from there. And that then you get the tightness in the muscles. That's because it's eating up all the calcium, which are used for muscle contraction. And then you actually can't, and so you feel dead-legged. Your legs can't go. You're trying to push as hard as you can, but you can't.
Yeah, and you see it very visually. When you're watching it on telly, these guys just it feels like they almost grind to halt. I mean, they're still running pretty fast, but they still just have a significant slowdown, don't they?
Yeah. So
and I think, sorry. Yeah. No, go.
It is directly impacting muscle contraction. And that's actually a key thing. So you do feel like your legs just can't turn because you know what, they're actually not turning as they were before because you're getting that impairment from,
Okay, and I think that's very different because I've also heard people refer to like when they stiff, that's the lactic acid buildup afterwards, and that's obviously completely different. That's your muscle fibers actually being torn and now repairing. So that's a very different conversation. But so let's focus on lactate here in terms of it being this redemption, and it's no longer the baddie, it's now the goodie. And you mentioned it can be used as a fuel source within the hearts, within different organs, and so on. And I mean, can you give us a little bit more on that and how that gets utilized and why that's so important and maybe specific to running, like how is that important to running? Why do we utilize lactate thresholds and so on? If you want to recover from sessions faster, not feel tired all the time, run pain and injury free, and improve your endurance, then be sure to join me in my upcoming training specifically for female runners over the age of 45. In it, I'll share with you my simple 5-step framework that will transform your running. Simply scan the QR code on screen now or click on the link in the description to save your seats in the training now. We look forward to seeing you there.
Okay, so because we can see how lactate behaves in the body, so we know when you're running slow, lactate is low. As you increase your effort, lactate rises up, and it behaves in a very specific way. So, and you get this lactate threshold curve, and you end up with what's called the lactate threshold. And without getting too much into it, it's just basically a point where when you get so there are actually 2 thresholds, which is also very confusing because of course we can't keep things simple. So back in the day, we spoke about the aerobic threshold and the anaerobic threshold. which are two different points in the curve. The aerobic threshold is kind of like what you'd consider the zone 2 boundary. And let's not get into zones, please, but it's just, I'm just going to illustrate.
Different chats, yeah.
Different chats. But where that zone 2 is, what happens at that zone 2 boundary is that lactate is typically flat, and then it will start to rise a little bit. But that rise is still manageable. And that first inflection point is the aerobic threshold. What we actually call it's LT1, lactate turn point 1, because it's where it turns the first time. And it behaves very consistently for a while again until you get to the next point. And this is actually what we call, when we talk about lactate threshold, the anaerobic threshold, where now things are now going to go to critical failure after this. It flicks again. And at this point, it becomes exponential. So every time you go up a little bit, that lactate goes up very, very sharply. And
when you say go up, you're talking about going up in intensity. So as you're increasing your intensity, that curve is increasing. Yes.
And it kind of forms like a hockey stick. Like it's flat, and then it flicks, and then it flicks up. So it becomes more. And so that behavior is very predictable. And at that LT2, we actually know exactly what that means. That is a pace. If you're running whatever speed you're running at that LT2 point, that is a pace you can hold for roughly an hour. And this is like something that's very verifiable in the lab. So from this, we can actually predict your performance either way. We know from this point how much longer you can last. And we know if you go slower than this, you can exercise longer and longer and longer. Marathons, for example, are run, a little bit below LT2, between LT1. If you're running a 5K race, it's always going to be above LT2, where it is that. And that's why things don't settle down when you're running a 5K pace. So that LT2 is what we call the maximum lactate steady state, where things do end up stabilizing. And you can, if you stay at that speed, your heart rate and lactate will stay constant, not forever, it will remain so. But if you're running at 5K pace, at any point in that 5K race later on, your heart rate goes up and your lactate goes up, and it keeps going up. So those are very, very predictable behaviors. How this matters for you as an athlete is that when you train, you can actually shift that lactate curve. We call it right shifting. So essentially, you shift the speed at which the threshold occurs. Because obviously, if your threshold only happens at 10 Ks per hour, your LT2, that limits how fast you can go beyond that. But if you're an elite athlete, you talked about the Olympic marathons, those athletes, the women have lactate thresholds of 19 kilometers per hour. The men are running half marathons in an hour. So their thresholds are literally like, what's that? 21 yards. It's fast. 245 a kilometer. It's actually unfathomable. And and we obviously exist somewhere in between this. So you can actually shift that threshold faster and faster and faster, which means that you can then essentially improve your fitness. And how you do that is through training.
That's what I think our runners will be saying. How do we shift that over?
And the key thing there is building your aerobic system, because the more efficient your aerobic system is, the more energy you can produce at slower speed. So you can essentially run at 340K if you're an elite man, and it's actually like it's an easy run, which for me or for us is like a sprint for some people. So training and this is where we now need to do the basics. It's building your aerobic base. So we talk about the things, the adaptations that you need to happen. To improve the efficiency of aerobic system, you need to increase your mitochondria, which are the energy house of the cell. Those are the organs that actually organelles that produce energy in the body. And you can increase the size of them, the number of them, and all of the little enzymes, which are the workers in the mitochondria. There's other things you often see this when you read about it, that you can improve the capillarization to the muscle fibers. You can increase your maximum oxygen intake. All of that happens by improving your aerobic base, by doing easy volume, doing long runs. Long runs are very, very, very important. So doing the basic training. Then at some point you will then need to do work on the high end. And this is where interval training, that kind of thing comes in. But that only comes in after you've built the base. And the base is not just the physiological base, it's also improving the physical structure, making yourself stronger, making your muscles more resistant to the damage that comes from running harder and faster and longer. So training in of itself is going to help you shift that threshold, improve the threshold. And when that improves, your performance improves. And we can track that as you go along. So you can follow someone along and you do a test, you can do a time trial. And as your time trial improves, you're essentially improving your threshold.
That threshold. Yeah, I think this is where people often get confused is because they go, okay, you want me to improve my lactate threshold. My lactate threshold is not essentially easy running. So they think I need to do more of that. I need to do more of training that threshold. Which, yes, I mean, I know there are nuances here, but you're essentially saying that the starting point and the most important thing is that you have to have a big base before, or actually that by having this big aerobic base, that is in itself going to improve that lactate threshold.
Exactly, because the main thing about running and any training is that you need to do enough of it to actually get yourself to improve. And if you're going to be running at lactate threshold all the time, that's actually really hard running. Go out and do a 25-minute tempo run at your threshold and then tell me how you feel the next day. You're not going to want to go out and do another one. Actually, you can't.
Yeah.
Same thing with intervals. You cannot do 5 days of interval training a week because it's hard on your body, physically hard on your body. It's physiologically hard on your body. And the thing about easy volume and long runs is they're actually repeatable. So you can stress the system. It's a smaller dose, yes, and you might think, oh, you're not working hard enough, but it's a repeated stress that you can do over and over and over, and it is still targeting the same things. You're almost doing more work actually with these easier runs because you can do more of it in a week. You can do 20 minutes of intervals in a week. You can do 30 minutes of threshold training, but you can do 4 hours of running in a week. And it's a repeated stress on your body that is building on those systems. It is it is making your muscles stronger because you're the repeated stress of running. But the cool thing is that you're able to recover from it because the stress level is so low over time.
Okay.
But you're still targeting all of the same systems, because when you go out and do a threshold run, it actually is aerobic running. It's just a very, very high end aerobic running. VO2 max workouts are VO2 max workouts. It's maximum oxygen uptake. You're still stressing the aerobic system, but you're doing it it's a big stress in a very small time frame. But in a training week, most of your stress is going to be coming from doing continuous easy aerobic volume that is still going to be building all those same systems.
Yeah. And I was going to ask you sort of what was good training for lactate threshold and pushing it. So the first thing is that nice big aerobic base then before you even start anything. And that sounds like it's going to be quite a big A priority. And then if you have that nice big aerobic base, say you've been running nice and solid, there's some nice workouts that we could do because I know I'm always interested in the workouts that sort of help, because I love doing things like that. I love a good session. What sort of sessions then help if you have that base in place? Then what are you looking to do?
So then what you really want to do, so you don't want to be running, if your goal is to improve your threshold. Like I said, all training improves everything. But obviously, the more specific training will target that thing a lot more. So what you actually want to do is you want to work in between those two thresholds, that aerobic and anaerobic threshold. Running at LT2 itself is actually a very challenging thing to do, because as soon as you cross over, you are now in that, destined to failure zone. And it's very difficult to pull back from that, because once you are overreaching in a session, not in a overall training context, once you're overreaching the session, it's very hard for you to pull back. So you almost want to be training yourself in between those two thresholds, but closer to LT2. And there are different ways to do it. So you can do it either in the form of interval training. So you often hear of things like cruise intervals, for example. Cruise intervals are a kind of threshold training. Or you can do longer sustained intervals. So the cruise intervals are more about sort of like 3 to 6 minutes of work. The longer intervals might be 5 to 10 minutes of work, or you can do continuous running. And the continuous tempos are very, very challenging. I don't think most people should be doing those. They're almost like an endpoint thing where you are when you're really, really fit, or they're actually quite good for when you're preparing for like a 10K race as like a stamina workout for a 10K race. But those are the kind of sessions you do. If you're doing interval work, you'd be looking at doing 20 to 30 minutes of work in total in the session. For the tempo runs, between 15 and 25 minutes. It is your 1 hour pace, but you're not going to get an hour tempo in a training session. It's going to be a race. You're going to be broken. You're going to need a whole block of time to recover. And with those, when you do interval work, for example, I find that you can control the session a lot more. So I like to do things like 3 minutes, and I'll do 8 to 10 times 3 minutes with very short rest at close to my threshold pace, not faster. So I usually go threshold pace, maybe 5 seconds lower. You don't need to be at exactly threshold. It needs to be high enough to stimulate that zone. And you can't be specific, because if it's like it's wet outside now here where I am, I'm not going to run at the same pace as I would on a nice clear day when it's like 15 degrees. So of course that varies day by day. So I always like to work a little bit under it. So you can do 3-minute intervals. The Norwegians like to do 6-minute intervals, something like 6 times 6 minutes. So that you can play around with those things, but it's essentially doing around 20 minutes to 30 minutes of work, either in the form of intervals or as a continuous run around that threshold and a little bit under. And that is the right dose to stimulate threshold. And you only need to do 1 session a week. I know people are doing these double thresholds and blah, blah, blah. But yeah, this 1 session a week should be good, paired up with a good long run and some easy mileage. That's going to do the trick for you.
Well, it sounds like if you want to be doing these double sessions, you need a massive aerobic base.
It always comes back to
that. Otherwise, you're just banging your head on a wall, really.
Can I just give an example just to show why you need the base for these sessions? Please. So if you look at, like, say, a 6 by 6 minute session, example, okay, and you're going to do 2 minutes, 90 seconds rest. You're going to do a warm up, you're going to do a cool down, you're going to do 6 by 6 minutes. You'll end up doing an hour of running in total in the session, of which half an hour is going to be at a relatively high intensity. If you don't have a base, if you can't run more than an hour on an easy day comfortably, how are you then going to manage to do a session that's an hour long with half an hour? And that intensity is costly. The more intensity you work, the costlier it is to your system. 30 minutes of threshold running is not the same as 30 minutes of easy running. When they do, this is how Strava works out things like your effort score. It's weighted according to intensity. The more intensely a session is, the more it costs you physically. So you need to be able to be comfortable running not just an hour, like more than an hour and 15, an hour and 30, if you're going to do an hour session with intensity. So I always say intensity sessions are still volume sessions. You still need to have an endurance. There's an endurance component to it. It's not just intensity. People think about it as, it's just threshold. It's intensity within a certain amount of volume. And without that volume base, you can't handle the intensity in that volume, if that makes sense.
I love the way you say that, because if you can't sustain, if you're not running for longer than an hour and a half, how do you expect to do a run that's an hour where half of that is high intensity? Because that high intensity, as you said, costs you more. So you mentioned the energy, the energy that we create at the beginning of this podcast when you're speaking about that. If you don't have that, you can't spend it.
Exactly.
I want to compare it to, like, if you go shopping, if you have X amounts of money in your bank accounts, you can't go spend that until you have X plus amounts of, because you can spend it, but then you've got nothing left either. So you've got to be able to have a little bit more in your bank account before you spend some of that in going buy those nice new pair of super shoes. I love that analogy, and again, it does just keep always coming back to this aerobic base, which Nikki and I've not shut up about on this podcast. So that's why we wanted to have you on, because when you understand the physiology behind that, you then go, oh, I now see. So I'm not just going to go smash myself with lactate sessions or threshold sessions, or I need to have the base. And then tap into that little bit of I know on our other podcasts, on our Fast to Be on 50 podcast, they speak a lot around like the lowest minimal dosage. So how much of that, and we had Dr. Nikki Key on, and she also spoke around that with HRTs, that minimal dosage where you're going to get elicit a response, and it's a safe response. So you're not going to get injured. You're not going to really hurt yourself. So I really, I love that in Ntutu. I think that's it's hit the nail on the head. Yeah. Good. And Ntutu, I mean, so that's from like a lactate threshold and racing perspective. And obviously we're coming back to this base all the time, and maybe just go back a little bit in terms of perceptions of fatigue and soreness. We know now that it's not this lactic acid. It is a form of acidosis. It's stuff going on within the muscles. But now just understanding that differently, does that change how we perceive recovery, or how we should be recovering? What are the things that you recommend in terms of, then, now that we understand that as the mechanism of fatigue, how should we be recovering? What should we be doing?
So I suppose part of it from before you get this, then it means don't be afraid of this lactic monster because it's not a thing that matters. In fact, the research shows that when you finish a session, lactate levels return to normal within an hour of you finishing your session. So any adverse effects you're feeling 2 days later have nothing to do with what happened with your lactate levels in your body, because your body clears that. It's a product of energy production, and then your body will actually use that lactate anyway when you finish your exercise to replenish glycogen and to go elsewhere where it's needed. So that's not really an issue. And then just realizing that there are other things that are causing fatigue, and a lot of it is that running is just physically hard on your body.
Yeah.
There's a lot of eccentric loading that happens, the muscle contractions, and the harder you run, the greater that force production is. So, and you actually you get little micro tears in your muscles when you work harder. Even your skeleton, like there's little micro fractures in your skeleton, and part of adaptation is that your body will then adapt and repair these things, and the fatigue is the cost of repair. Again, repair is not a thing that happens in isolation. Your body then needs more energy to repair and to build and stuff, which is why fueling after workouts is so important, because you're giving your body the tools it needs to repair itself and for you to come back a lot stronger. So any soreness, this delayed onset of muscle soreness that comes from training, comes from actual physical damage to the muscles, and it comes from the process of repairing. So you are fatigued because your body is doing the work it needs to repair itself, and that takes more energy from you. So, which is also why you shouldn't be hammering 2 back-to-back interval sessions, because you're not allowing yourself the opportunity to recover well. Which is why rest days are important, which is why recovery is so important, because all that stuff ties in together in sort of micro and macro scales of recovery. So the best things to do, really, I think fueling is the most important thing immediately afterwards, and sleep. Like it's amazing. Sleep is just the most amazing thing in the world ever. There are no secrets. There are no magic shortcuts. Sleep is as close as it gets to one of them. And then I know this is a tricky one for people to understand, but sometimes actually being active helps, because so again, this lactate thing is, what's interesting is when they measure lactate depletion at the end of a run, or clearance at the end of the run, it actually clears faster if you do an easy jog after a session instead of resting, of stopping. So, and that's probably to do with the lactate shuttle. And I wouldn't talk about that in a lot, but that you're teaching your body to then start using that lactate in the muscles and to send it around. So a little bit of active recovery, and active recovery doesn't mean going out and doing, and I see people posting hour and 15 recovery runs. That is not a recovery run. Like an hour and 15 is not a recovery run. It's like a 30-minute easy run the day after. Might help with some of that recovery, but again, only if you're tolerating the training. Just be very, don't just add a run in because, coach said recovery run. If you're not actually, if you do need the rest day is more important. But in some situations, being active recovery can help. So you might get onto the elliptical, you might go into the pool, but definitely just stopping after workout doesn't help. Do a little bit of, it's also why cool downs are important. You need to cool down because it actually does help, and it does train the shuttling of lactate, and it will make that more efficient. And it has been shown to help a little bit with muscle recovery, just keeping your body a little bit active. So basically fuel, sleep, and then a little bit of active recovery, only if you tolerate everything else. Don't do that if you're not tolerating everything else.
Yeah, I mean, I love that. And I think let's just to be clear, though, Ntutu saying only if you can tolerate that, because then we are constantly getting people who will then go and run the Comrades Marathon or go and run Berlin Marathon now, and then go the next day and go and flush out with a recovery run, So that's not what Ntutu is saying here. Ntutu is saying from a heavy session, you can then maybe do some active recovery. Because I mean the effects, the fatigue and the stuff that you're feeling after a race is not just what Ntutu's comparing it. It's a whole myriad. There's so many other things. There's skeletal fatigue, nervous system, all sorts of things that goes out there. So I just wanted to clarify that, because
racing is different from training.
Training and racing very different there. So we're talking about training specifically.
Training. For me, I just like a good old brisk walk the next day. That just works a treat and takes a bit of the loading off, but gets the blood flow going. I definitely feel better if I just jump in a car after a session. Oh, by the time I get home, I'm, stiff as anything.
If you think about that, Nikki, if you look at the elite marathoners, right? So Ntutu, you alluded to that. They're easy runs, like they're really easy runs. They're doing it like 4 minutes a K. And if we I know this is tough, but if we had to extrapolate that to my easy run pace, proportionately to what they're doing, it would be a walk, right? In terms of that oxygen cost. So that's why I do think a walk is so effective for a recreational runner. Whereas if they're going for a recovery run, very often they're tapping into that easy run zone anyway. So a walk is so effective. Light foam rolling with a bit of a walk is my go-to as well.
I think, Shona, you really tapped on that. It has to be really, really slow. And I think when I see people doing active recovery, they still try and maintain some magical average pace because people are married to this idea that I need to run at whatever, 7 minutes a K, 6 minutes a K. But the effect here is not the pace that you're running at, it's that low intensity movement. And a walk might be the best thing for you to do. Elliptical might be the best thing for you to do. Or if getting in the pool might be better for you than actually going out. And so it's whatever it is. And for elite athletes, they are so efficient and so developed that a 40-minute run at 4 minutes a K is literally just like, it's for us like a walk. It is so slow for them. I
could never even do that. So let alone dream about it. But
I've had experiences where I've run around Shona when we were in Pretoria, running at the University of Pretoria, and South Africa's Vos's marathon, I used to train on the grass, and they would be chatting away in the morning, and I ran behind them for a little bit, and these guys were running at 350 a K. Like it's the recovery run in the morning before the track session in the afternoon, and they're ticking along at 350 a K, and they are chatting. Then no one is huffing and puffing, and here I am straining behind them.
It's not like you're slow either. So that's I remember those days. Yeah. Oh man. Good. Nikki, anything else that you want to add in here?
I think that's really interesting, and I definitely think for me that's always been a thing that's worked. The bigger my aerobic base, the more I get out of the training sessions I do. But I think if your aerobic base is a bit on the small side, you can maybe still do an extra session, but you really need to take those sessions down to what I term as baby sessions and not push them too much, really, because there's not much to be gained until that aerobic base is solid and stable and the foundations of everything. So I think that's really interesting. Yeah. Good.
Parting, like if you, now we've gone from lactic acid to lactate to, good training principles. Something you would want to leave our listeners with thinking about all of that, like some sort of takeaways for you?
So, I think we're all going to be in agreement here. I do think that a lot of it is, again, I want to come back to that minimum effective dose, that when you're trying to improve these things and do these things, that you're not trying to do the most you can do. And sometimes, it can be like doing, I said I might do 10 times 3 minutes threshold, but that doesn't mean you all have to do 10 times 3 minutes. You might get away with doing 4 or 5 times 2 minutes, maybe. So it's training smart for where you are. And also just remembering that the aerobic base is the foundation of everything. And that gives you the capacity to do more. And it's something that you can keep working on. It's not like you stop, you don't build, stop and do interval training. You always keep easy volume during even your specific phase. So it's something that you keep working on. And it's about managing everything else and remembering that intensity is costly to the body. It costs a lot for you to do hard sessions. So always keep that in mind. And again, always just focus on recovery. Recovery is the thing ultimately that drives adaptation, it drives improvement, and it drives performance.
Yeah, excellent. I absolutely love that. Thank you. I have nothing else to add there because I think both you and Nikki have hit the nail on the head. I think the only thing I will add is that I really hope everyone listening to this no longer uses the words lactic acid again, and that they can start seeing that lactate is it's a good guy, not a baddie, not a bad guy. So Yeah, so Ntutu, it's your friend, not it's like friend, not food, right? From Finding Nemo. But so no, Ntutu, thank you so much. As always, I always get value from talking to you, and I always learn something new every single time. And I really hope that our listeners got a ton of value from this episode. And even if it is just that they learned that it's not lactic acid, and that lactate's a good guy. And all these takeaways have been amazing. So thank you so much for your time. Those of you who are listening, if you have any comments, please pop them below, and share this with your training groups, your training friends. If you hear lactic acid in your running group, then pop this onto the running group as well. But thank you so much for your time, and to Nikki as well. Thank you as always. And we'll see everyone again next week.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.